Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast. I'm Dr. Taves, joined by my co-host, Dr. Stoerzbach. And today we are going to, again, just push us further down this road of empowering you, the person that is suffering with headaches and migraines and searching for an answer. We want to empower you to break free from a life of fear of your next migraine or headache and dependence on medication and thrive in everything you do. And so on today's podcast, we're going to talk about why migraines in this condition, why it's starting to be considered a disease. And we're going to break down what it means to call it a disease and why our medical model would call it a disease. And then we're also going to talk about, spoiler alert, we don't agree that we should call it a disease. And so we're going to break that down and talk about the debilitating aspects of migraines and how we want that to be diagnosed properly, but we want people to have some hope, and we feel like there is hope out there, and this disease label is sort of hopeless. So anyways, Dr. Stoerzbach, I'm kind of excited. This is something that I think we're just sort of leaning in and pushing against the current mantra or story or narrative that's out there about migraines. And I really hope this episode brings hope to people that are listening. Let's just kind of jump into the initial aspect of what's a disease, why do they call it a disease, what's going on here?
Yeah, so the definition of disease is, it was not a result of like an actual physical injury. And so obviously right off the bat, that kind of rings alarm bells in my head as far as migraines, because I do believe it is more of a musculoskeletal neck issue that is playing the largest role. And so I right away think, okay, we probably shouldn't classify this as a disease. Now, a lot of physicians out there, I think, are considering this more of like a brain issue, where the current explanation comes more from cortical depression. So I think we talked about maybe on like a functional MRI during a migraine, it might show a change in the brain, meaning it might slow down a bit and have this cortical depression. And then that could also trigger the trigeminal nerve, which we've talked about a lot, that feeds the face and can cause pain. And that's kind of like the current explanation, but they just still don't really back up one more step and say, like, why is that occurring?
Yeah. So a quick Google search, you'll find that a disease is defined as a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that produces specific signs or symptoms that affects a specific location and is not simply a direct result of physical injury. So I actually just want to pause there, because if we just think about, so if you're listening and you've been diagnosed with migraines, I wonder what percentage of people have a story that involves a whiplash injury, head trauma, neck trauma, right? Mm-hmm. And that alone, as the initial injury that led to them having migraines, because we do hear that commonly in the clinic
all the time,
sort of means that it can't classify as a disease, because there's a physical injury that occurred that led to them having these migraines. And so that alone, without going into the weeds and the details that we're like kind of gonna go into, backing up why we don't believe this is a disease, that alone, we need, at a surface level, we need to stop and consider, is this true? Is calling it a disease, meaning it's not a direct result of physical injury, appropriate? Now, I do think that to some extent, the label of disease is there because the Western medicine model, our healthcare system has struggled to find answers. And when we do our searches in preparation for these podcasts, we try to get into what the latest research is saying. What are these, whether it's researchers or clinicians that are kind of on the front lines of treating migraines, what are they saying? And most of the time we're left with sort of this empty, like, guesswork. They've seen certain things that are either correlated or experimental, or at its sort of early phase of trial, and they're trying to put the pieces together, but there's nothing really substantial that they're working off of. And this is such a debilitating problem, and since there's no solution, it almost makes more sense to say, well, let's just call it a disease. So if a doctor's listening to this and they're like, well, I don't believe it's a musculoskeletal problem, even though there's a connection to, potentially these whiplash injuries or head or neck trauma, what they're likely going to say is that we see this cortical spreading depression. And that's something they find where they believe it's the brain actually initiating this slowing of the transmission of a signal. So the brain activity sort of reduces for a period of time. I believe they see it like during a migraine, the migraine with aura in particular. And there's an abstract here I found on PubMed, and it basically says that it's a brain-initiated event that evolves into the cortical spreading depression. And the key here is that they say it activates the trigeminal nerve to cause headaches. Experimental evidence supports that relationship between migraine aura and the trigeminal activity through this cortical depression. And that's kind of significant because this trigeminal nerve and the pathway of the trigeminal nerve through the brainstem is something we talk about a lot. And why do we talk about that?
Well, because of its relation to the neck, because it's actually called the cervical trigeminal nucleus. It's all one circuit, and a lot of the nerves that come out of the upper part of the neck go into the trigeminal nucleus and then to the trigeminal nerve. So it actually is all one pathway. There is like no start or stop there.
Yeah. So they're seeing, what they're looking at is they're looking through their imaging and they're seeing this depression, and they're saying, okay, this is connected to the trigeminal vascular system, which is sort of the nerves connecting with the blood vessels and the trigeminal nerve in the brain. And they're saying, okay, like that connection makes sense. Now we have an answer. But really what they're neglecting to understand is that other connection where the brain is receiving sensory input from the neck, but it's traveling through the trigeminal cervical nucleus. And again, I know these are big words, but stick with us, which is really just sort of a bundle of different nerves that all meet up. And then from there, it sends a signal to the brain. Now, the important thing to understand about our brain is that the brain itself is just allowing us to realize and sort of put into something that's useful, this information that we're getting from organs, right?
Right.
So whether that's our visual system, our taste, hearing, our pressure, sense of pain, our musculoskeletal system, how we move, all of that, our brain is just this computer that receives the information, organizes it, and then tells us what to do with it. And so to say that the brain is just making this up and causing pain out of nowhere, one, they can't back it up, and two, it doesn't intuitively make sense.
Right.
There needs to be a cause. And so that last dot that we need to connect is that relationship to the neck. Mm-hmm. And to us, it's just so crystal clear. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's sort of, again, in the weeds. And if that was like way over your head, you can either go back and listen to it again, or just stick with us through the rest of the podcast, because it'll get more on layman's terms. But any other thoughts there, Dr. Stoerzbach?
Well, yeah, one thing I want to bring up is a lot of people have heard the term sciatica, and throw that term around a lot, and kind of everyone who's heard of the term just knows, oh yeah, I think it's like a back problem, but it shoots pain down your leg. And that's fairly true. You can have a physical injury or impingement of that nerve higher up near the spine, and it will send the signal down the pathway, which could be all the way down to your foot, even though there's nothing wrong with your leg or foot. And people can accept that and understand that right off the bat. And honestly, a very similar thing is happening here in the neck. It's just traveling up versus down, and it's starting in the spine, and then it's traveling up into the nerves of the head and face. And so it's not exactly the same thing, but it's very, very similar. And for some reason, like people either don't think that way or don't want to accept that. But I do think that's kind of important to think about it, and just kind of think through that. Like to me, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think if we just sort of back up and rationalize with, what's the most likely scenario, I think it should overwhelmingly be the neck and its connection to these different processes that we find. So if we'll take another approach to this, okay? Because they're using that sort of brain-initiated activity of the cortical, meaning the brain tissue depression slowing down, as evidence to say that this is just a gene-related brain activity problem, and because there's no real solution or mechanical or physical trauma that occurred, it's got to be a disease. So that's kind of the reasoning there. But if we look at what we're seeing clinically, I think that this holds a lot of weight as well, even though we have yet to publish anything or come out with solid data, which we hope to soon. Mm-hmm. But what we're seeing clinically is that the majority of our patients have been diagnosed with migraines.
Right.
Migraines with aura, migraines without aura, episodic migraines, atypical migraines. So migraine, and then attach whatever you want to it. That's who we see primarily.
Right.
And so one of the things that I think happens in our world is whether it's the person with migraines or maybe the provider that is resistant to believe that what we're doing actually works, is they will say, well, they're not actually treating migraines. They're treating neck-related headaches, but they're not treating true migraines. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking about this before the podcast, and it's actually rare that we see someone who just comes in with a tension headache.
Right.
Like almost all our patients are migraines.
Right, exactly. And I definitely think if we sat down in most physician offices and told them like we're treating migraines with the neck, they would kind of not quite want to believe that. But if we said, oh, actually most of the people we see are just tension type and they're that true cervicogenic headache, which is a smaller population, they could get on board with that. But like you just said, almost all of our patients are actually the classic migraine symptoms and have been diagnosed with migraine, and we're treating their neck and having results.
Yeah. Yeah. But what it's coming from is this, I think it's the assumption that it's been proven that it's a vascular problem. It's the assumption that migraine's been proven to be a neurological condition, but it hasn't. There's very little to no evidence. It's just like correlating some things that they find. Mm-hmm. And so there's not a lot to stand on. And so to say that, to sort of adamantly come at this approach when we are providing more relief than the medications out there on the market, to come at this approach and say, no, you're wrong. I mean, there's really not much to stand on. And so we clinically, we are seeing patients that have been diagnosed, and this is not a diagnosis that we provide. We don't diagnose for migraine. This is a diagnosis that's coming from the neurologist or the primary care doctor that they are receiving. And that's probably like 10 years ago. And then they're treated with medications. And we hear it all the time where they get the diagnosis of migraine and then they get a medication and it might not work. So they get another medication and people are frustrated because they're not getting an answer. But that's telling you something that they don't really have an answer. And so that's indication that you should keep searching and we should keep trying to solve this problem. And then let's talk a little bit about like the results we have and how, if this was a brain problem, like why would we help?
Right. Well, I think just let's talk about the brain problem, because I think a lot of people think migraine and there's also a lot of like what we might consider a brain issue associated with it, such as, oh my gosh, I have light sensitivity. That must have to do more with my brain. Or, I have ringing in my ears, or I feel dizzy too with my migraine, or I feel nauseous. And immediately, kind of intuitively, people are like, that's got to be a bigger brain issue. And I would go back to that and argue that all those cranial nerves that are in charge of those functions most of them go through that trigeminal cervical nucleus, and they also dive down into the neck, and a lot of them even run along muscles in the neck. And so we just need to keep remembering that those weird side effects that might seem more brain like, even the stroke like symptoms that can be terrifying for people that send people to the ER, can still resolve with our neck treatment. So if it was just a brain issue, we would not be able to make any impact at all.
Right.
Because we're not touching the brain. We're not doing anything for the brain.
Yeah. Our careers in this area would be really short-lived.
Right.
Because we'd see 10 patients and then 5 of them would give us 1-star Google reviews.
Right.
And then we'd be out of business.
Yeah.
That's kind of how our world works. If you're making stuff up, it won't last very long.
Yeah.
And by the way, we just got our 60th 5-star review today. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome.
That's awesome.
We're excited about that. Okay. And one thing that we want to be careful and make sure that you guys understand is that having this classification of migraine as a disease is partially due to people with migraines sort of needing others to understand how debilitating this is.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah, because it's incredibly debilitating.
Mm-hmm.
And we get that. I mean, we see it all the time. And part of the reason we're so passionate about this and love what we do is because we can provide hope and take some of that load off of like, I'm a problem, because, all of these doctors that go through all this training and are so smart and go to all these clinics and no one knows what's wrong with me. That's hard. Mm-hmm. And so we understand that, but we don't believe the solution is calling it a disease and throwing up our hands in a sense and saying, well, you're just going to have to live with this because you didn't luck out in the genetic pool and your brain is just sort of initiating this event that causes this debilitating pain.
Right.
And by the way, if someone, because not everyone gets better in what we do, right. A high percentage do, but why wouldn't everyone get better?
So with those kind of outlying patients, it's normally because it needs to be another type of treatment, whether that's with their eyes, like eye coordination. So they might need to see a vision therapist. And a lot of times it could be like a jaw issue, an occlusion, meaning how the teeth come together and how the jaw sits. All of that actually can feed into the issue too. And we can try to, send you out to those specialists to get that last piece. But we're not sending them back out to get more meds. We're not sending them back out to like look at their brain again. It's actually another almost physical thing, whether it's how the muscles work in the eyeball or how the jaw joint sits, like that is all important also.
Yeah, again, think of the brain as the computer that's receiving the sensory input and then making sense of it, and then we realize what's happening. So from our approach, we're trying to hit at all of the sensory input and try to understand why is the brain responding with pain in this pattern. And so number one, our priority is the neck. We think that's the most likely scenario, but we understand like the jaw can still be involved, the visual system can still be involved, even the vestibular system can be involved, and work our way down to what's happening in the shoulders and the upper back and the rest of the neck. And so all these other systems can be involved. The other thing is that the way the brain and our central nervous system responds to chronic pain can play into that. And we've done an episode on that, on chronic pain and what's called central sensitization, mm-hmm. where the central nervous system itself is sort of just learned this pain signal and sort of accommodated to it for so long that you're hypersensitive to it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, and so just another side note on chronic pain is, they've noticed that connection between the input from the peripheral nerves, meaning outside the spinal cord, going into the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord goes to the brain, that like that area with chronic pain, there's these little neurons called interneurons, and they're considered like bouncers at a club. They basically keep out all the information, because if we actually took in every single piece of information at all times, we would all be crazy. Like our brains wouldn't be able to do that. So we're smart enough, and our bodies are smart enough to kind of block a lot of things, and so only certain things get through. Now with chronic pain, they've actually shown that those inner neurons start to like either die off or go on vacation. Now they can come back, so don't think like once they're gone forever, but what that allows is a lot more information and a lot more pain to go into the brain. Again, that's more of a physical change right outside the spinal cord. That's not near the brain that change is happening.
Right. Still not a brain problem.
Right.
And still not something that requires medication either. I mean, there are other ways to change that sort of process or reverse that process. But yeah, that's sort of why people wouldn't improve with our process, is because there's sort of layers to it that we need to address. And so we use other providers for that. And we feel like if we can't help someone, we can at least provide a pretty good explanation of like what needs to happen for them to get better. Mm-hmm. So to summarize, our message here is that we want you out there who's listening to this and has headaches or migraines and are just feeling hopeless, discouraged because no one has an answer for you. We want you to know that we do not believe you have this untreatable, unexplainable disease. We believe, and what we see is that you have something that can be explained physically through our musculoskeletal system and needs to be corrected. And there is a solution, and we need to pursue that. And so we want to provide you with hope. And we want to push against this idea that migraines are a disease and sort of highlight that there is not a firm foundation or robust amounts of evidence that they are making this claim off of. And so we hope that provides you with hope. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that's very well said. I hope that people listening to this will reach out to us. We have a great website, and you could call us. Bria is amazing at the front desk, so give her a call. She can give you lots of information. And I do think that if we can just kind of change this narrative, we can actually make a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. If you like what we're doing, please tell your friends and rate our podcast on wherever you're listening. And please subscribe so that you get all the podcasts each week as they come out on Monday morning. And let us know if there's any valuable pieces of information that you would like to hear. And then we can kind of cater our podcast to what you, the listener, are wanting to know about headaches and migraines. Because as always, it's our mission to empower everyone with headaches and migraines to break free from this life of fear and dependence and thrive in everything you do. Thanks for listening.